Look at the world around you, the city you live in, the words you are reading, the laws that order your day, the calendar on your wall, the food grown in distant fields and carried to your table. All of it rests on something we almost never stop to question: civilization. The vast, intricate machinery of writing and agriculture and law and mathematics and astronomy that separates us from the animal and the wild. We tell ourselves a story about where it came from. We say we built it. Slowly, painfully, over countless generations, humanity climbed up out of the caves and the forests and figured it all out on its own. Trial and error, discovery upon discovery. The long, patient ascent of a clever species teaching itself step by step how to become civilized. But that is not the story the ancient world tells. Not at all. Go back to the oldest records humanity ever made. Go to the first cities, the first written words, the first myths carved into clay and stone, and ask them a simple question. Where did all this come from? Where did you learn to farm, to write, to build, to read the stars? And listen to the answer they give again and again across cultures that never met, on continents separated by oceans no ancient ship could cross. They do not say we figured it out ourselves. They say someone came and taught us. Someone, a being, a figure, not quite human or more than human. In Mesopotamia, they said it rose from the sea, a creature part fish and part man, who taught them everything and then returned to the waves each night. In the Andes, they said a bearded stranger walked out of the wilderness, gave them civilization, and vanished across the ocean. In Mexico, a feathered serpent brought knowledge and law and left with a promise to return. In Egypt, they said the gods themselves once ruled as kings in a golden first age and handed down the arts of civilization before departing. In West Africa, a people spoke of amphibian teachers who came from a distant star. Different names, different faces, the same story. Someone came from outside, gave humanity the gift of civilization, and then went away. And in almost every case, that someone left behind a promise that one day they would come back. Now, why would this happen? Why would peoples with no contact, no shared language, no common history, all reach for the very same explanation for where civilization came from? Coincidence? A trick of the human mind? Or the scattered memory of something that actually happened? A real event so profound that every branch of humanity carried it forward in its oldest and most sacred stories. That is the mystery we are going to follow tonight. Not one god, not one myth, but the pattern beneath all of them. The recurring worldwide memory of the teacher who came from outside, handed humanity everything it needed to rise, and then left. We are going to meet these civilizers one by one. We are going to hear what they taught and how they came and where they went. We are going to weigh the ordinary explanations against the extraordinary ones, honestly, without flinching from either. And we are going to end with the strangest part of all, the promise. Because if the ancient world is right, then somewhere out there, the teachers who gave us civilization said they would return. And humanity, whether it remembers or not, may still be waiting. What if we did not build our world? What if it was given to us? And what if the givers are not finished with us yet? Welcome. To understand why the ancient world believed civilization was given rather than built, you first have to appreciate a genuine puzzle. A puzzle that is not mystical at all, but historical, and that has troubled serious thinkers for a very long time. And the puzzle is this: civilization, when it appears astonishingly fast. For the overwhelming majority of the human story, our ancestors lived as hunters and gatherers. For tens of thousands of years, across immense spans of time, Human beings foraged and hunted and moved with the seasons, and the basic shape of life changed very little from one millennium to the next. And then, in a geological blink, something extraordinary happened. In a handful of places on Earth, over a relatively short stretch of time, human beings began to farm, to settle, to build cities, to write, to organize into states, to track the movements of the heavens with mathematical precision. The whole apparatus of civilization erupted, seemingly out of nowhere, after ages upon ages of near stillness. This is a real phenomenon, and it is genuinely remarkable. The transition from scattered foraging bands to organized urban civilization, with all its complexity, its writing and its law codes and its astronomy and its monumental architecture, happened with a speed that can seem almost impossible when you set it against the vast, slow background of everything that came before. It is as if humanity, after crawling for 100,000 years, suddenly stood up and ran. Now, modern scholarship has real explanations for this, and we will treat them with full seriousness as we go. Changes in climate at the end of the last ice age, the gradual accumulation of knowledge reaching the tipping point, the way settled agriculture once begun could snowball into ever greater complexity. These are genuine, powerful explanations, and no honest account can wave them away. But here is the point that matters for our story. The ancient peoples who actually lived through the aftermath of this leap, who inherited its fruits, did not explain it the way modern scholars do. They had no concept of gradual social evolution over millennia. What they had, instead, was a memory or a story or a conviction, and it took a very particular and very consistent form. They said the knowledge had been given to them by someone who came from outside. And this is where the puzzle stops being merely historical and starts becoming genuinely strange, because it is not one culture that says this. It is culture after culture, on every inhabited continent, in civilizations that had no contact with one another, separated by oceans and deserts and thousands of years. And they do not merely share a vague sense that the gods were involved, they share something far more specific. They share a script, a recurring pattern with the same distinctive elements appearing again and again across the world. Let us name the elements of that pattern now, because recognizing them is the key to everything that follows. Once you have the pattern in your mind, you will see it repeat with uncanny fidelity in every civilizer we meet. The first element is arrival from outside. The teacher is not one of us. He comes from elsewhere, from beyond the boundaries of the ordinary human world. And notice especially where he so often comes from the water rising out of the sea, or from the sky descending from the heavens. Water and sky, again and again, the two great elsewheres from which the civilizers emerge. He arrives as a stranger, a being apart, marked as different from the people he comes to teach. The second element is the gift of knowledge. The teacher does not conquer, at least not primarily. He instructs. He hands over the actual contents of civilization, the practical and the sacred alike. Agriculture, how to plant and harvest. Writing, how to record and remember. Law, how to order society. Astronomy, how to read the heavens. Craft, medicine, architecture, the calendar, the rituals of worship. The gift is comprehensive. It is nothing less than the whole toolkit of civilized life, delivered in the telling in a single age, rather than discovered slowly over generations. The third element is departure. The teacher does not stay. Having given his gift, he leaves, he withdraws. He returns to the sea from which he came, or ascends back into the sky, or sails away across the ocean, or simply vanishes. The civilizer is always, in the end, a figure who goes away, whose presence was temporary, a visitation rather than a permanent residence. And the fourth element, the strangest and most haunting of all, is the promise of return. Very often before departing, the teacher promises or is believed to come back someday, at the end of an age, in a time of need, at the appointed hour. The departure is not final. It leaves behind an expectation, a waiting, a watching of the horizon or the sea or the sky for the return of the one who gave us everything and then left. Arrival from outside, the gift of knowledge, departure, the promise to return. That is the script. And the deep mystery of this entire subject is not any single teacher, but the fact that this same script plays out with remarkable consistency in the sacred traditions of peoples who could not possibly have copied it from one another. So what do we make of that? Broadly, there are two ways to read it, and we are going to hold both of them honestly in view throughout this journey, because the honest tension between them is the real substance of the story. The mundane reading says the pattern is a product of the human mind and the human situation, that peoples everywhere, faced with the same astonishment at the achievements of their ancestors and the same tendency to attribute great gifts to divine beings, independently produced similar stories. That the resemblance reflects the sameness of human psychology, not the memory of a shared event. This is a serious reading, and much of the evidence supports it. The extraordinary reading says the pattern is a memory, that the reason so many cultures tell the same story is that something really happened, some real encounter, some real transmission of knowledge, so profound that every branch of humanity carried its memory forward, reshaped into the language of its own gods and its own myths. This is the reading that thrills, and that the whole tradition of ancient astronaut theory has seized upon, and we will not shy away from it, nor will we pretend it carries the same evidentiary weight as the mundane one. Our task is not to force a verdict, but to follow the pattern where it leads, to meet each civilizer in turn, to hear what each culture actually said, to weigh what the evidence actually shows, and to let you feel the genuine strangeness of the recurrence while staying honest about what it does and does not prove. So here is the road ahead. We will begin in Mesopotamia, at the very dawn of the written record, with the most vivid and concrete civilizer of them all, the amphibian teacher who rose from the sea to hand humanity its first civilization. From there, we will meet the 7 sages who guarded divine knowledge before the flood. We will confront the Anunnaki, the gods who, in one modern reading, made and taught humanity, and we will sort the ancient texts from their modern reinterpretation. We will return to the Watchers, the angels who taught a forbidden curriculum, the darkest version of the gift. We will travel to West Africa, to a people who spoke of amphibian instructors from a distant star. We will cross the ocean to the Americas, to the feathered serpent and the bearded creator who gave civilization and departed over the water. We will stand in Egypt in the golden first age when the gods themselves ruled as kings and handed down the arts of civilization. And then, having met them all, we will isolate the pattern that binds them, weigh the ordinary against the extraordinary, and follow the thread to its final, unsettling end. The promise that they would return. Let us begin where writing itself begins. Let us go down to the shore of an ancient sea and watch something rise out of the water. Our journey begins at the very dawn of recorded history, in the land between the rivers, in Mesopotamia. This is the place where, as far as we know, writing was first invented, where the first great cities rose, where civilization as we recognize it made its earliest appearance. And it is here fittingly, that we find the oldest and most vivid version of the story we are chasing, the story of the teacher who came from outside and handed humanity everything. His name, in the form that has come down to us, was Oannes. The account we have of Oannes is preserved through a fascinating chain of transmission, and it is worth understanding where it comes from, because it anchors this story in a real historical source rather than vague legend. In the centuries after the Great Age of Babylon, there was a Babylonian priest and scholar named Berossus, who set out to record the history and traditions of his people for the wider world. Berossus wrote down the ancient Babylonian accounts of the beginning of things, and although his own work was later lost, portions of it were quoted and preserved by other writers, so that his record of the origins survived, passed from hand to hand across the centuries. And among the things Berossus recorded was the story of Oannes. According to that account, in the very first days, the people of the land lived in a wretched and disordered state. They lived, the account says, without laws, without order, like animals, like beasts of the field. They had no agriculture, no cities, no writing, no crafts, no knowledge of how to live a civilized life. They were human, but they were not yet civilized. They existed in a kind of darkness, scattered and ignorant, without any of the arts that make ordered life possible. And then, out of the sea, something came. The account describes it in unforgettable detail. Out of the waters of the Persian Gulf, in that first age, there emerged a being, and it was not a man, or rather, it was not only a man. It was a creature that combined the human and the animal in a strange and specific way. It had, in the description that has come down to us, the body of a fish, but beneath the fish, or within the form of the fish, there was also the figure of a man. It had a human head, or a human head beneath the fish's head, and human feet beneath the tail of the fish, and it had a human voice, and it could speak in human language. A being part fish and part man, risen from the sea, able to walk upon the land and to speak to the people there. This creature, this amphibious teacher, was Oannes, and what it did, having emerged from the water, is the heart of our entire story. It taught. Oannes came among the disordered, animal-like people of the land, and it gave them civilization, not a piece of it, not one skill, all of it. The account is emphatic and comprehensive on this point. Oannes taught humanity the knowledge of letters, of writing itself, the foundational art of recording and remembering. It taught them the sciences. It taught them the principles of geometry and the working of numbers. It taught them how to build cities and to raise temples. It taught them how to establish laws, how to order their society, how to live under justice rather than in chaos. It taught them the arts of surveying and measuring the land, how to plant seeds and gather crops, how to cultivate the earth and bring forth food through agriculture. It taught them, in short, everything that softens and civilizes human life, everything that raised them from the state of beasts to the condition of a civilized people. Sit with the totality of that claim, because it is the purest expression of our theme that the ancient world ever produced. There is no gradual ascent here, no slow discovery over generations. There is a single figure arriving from outside who delivers the entire contents of civilization to a people who had nothing in one great act of teaching. Writing, law, mathematics, agriculture, architecture, the sciences, all of it, handed over, complete. This is the gift in its most concentrated and dramatic form. And there is one more detail about Oannes that is strange and telling, and that the account is careful to preserve. Oannes ate nothing. though it came among humans and taught them and lived among them through the day. This being took no human food. It consumed nothing. It was not a creature of appetite, not a being that shared the ordinary needs and hungers of the people it instructed. It was something apart, something that came to give rather than to take, present among humanity but not truly of it. And then, at the end of each day, when the sun went down, Oannes did something that completes the pattern and gives our whole story its shape. It returned to the sea. When darkness came, the being went back down into the waters from which it had risen, and spent the night in the deep beyond the world of humans, and then rose again with the day to continue its teaching. And when its work was finally done, when the gift of civilization had been fully delivered, Oannes withdrew into the sea for good, returning to the waters and departing from the world of men. Look at what we have in this single oldest example. We have the complete script, every element of the pattern we named, present and vivid at the very dawn of the written record. Arrival from outside, from the water, the being rising out of the Persian Gulf. The gift of knowledge, comprehensive and total, the entire toolkit of civilization handed over, and departure, the withdrawal back into the sea, the teacher who came from the deep and returned to it. The mold is set, this is the template, and as we travel the world, you will see this same shape, this same sequence appear again and again in cultures that never heard the name of Oannes. Now, what do we make of this? Let us be honest and careful, as we promised to be. What was Oannes, really? The mundane reading, the one favored by scholars, sees in Oannes a mythologized memory of something real but earthly. On this reading, Oannes is a symbolic figure, a way of personifying and honoring the origins of civilization itself. The detail of the being rising from the sea may reflect the fact that, in the ancient Mesopotamian understanding, wisdom and the ordering forces of the world were associated with the freshwater deep, the primeval waters beneath the earth from which order and knowledge were thought to flow. Oannes, in this reading, is closely connected to the great Mesopotamian god of wisdom, the sweet waters, and the deep, and represents the divine origin of civilized knowledge as the Mesopotamians conceived it. He is a theological figure, an embodiment of the idea that civilization came from the gods, dressed in the vivid imagery of the fishman from the sea. Some have gone further and speculated that behind the myth might lie the dim memory of real culture bearers, perhaps seafaring people who arrived by water bringing advanced knowledge, remembered and mythologized over the ages into a fish-clad teacher from the deep. This is more speculative and the evidence is thin, but it points to a reasonable instinct that myths of this kind can sometimes preserve in distorted form a memory of real contact, real transmission, real teachers who came from somewhere else. And then, of course, there is the extraordinary reading, the one this whole genre loves, which sees in Oannes something far stranger, a literal non-human being, an amphibious visitor, perhaps from the stars or from beneath the sea, a real teacher from outside who genuinely delivered civilization to early humanity. On this reading, the fishman is not a symbol but a memory of an actual encounter, described as faithfully as the ancient witnesses could manage, a being that really rose from the water and really taught. We will not pretend this reading has the evidence of the mundane one. It rests on taking the myth as literal report, which is a large step and one the evidence does not compel. But we raise it because it is the reading that gives this subject its charge, and because, as we will see, the same amphibian teacher will appear again on the far side of the world in a way that makes the coincidence genuinely hard to dismiss. For now, hold on to Oannes. Hold on to the fish that walked, the being that ate nothing and taught everything, the teacher who rose from the sea each dawn and returned to it each night, and who, when his work was done, went back into the deep and left humanity with civilization in its hands. He is the first and clearest of the civilizers, and he sets the pattern for all the rest. But Oannes, in the fuller Mesopotamian tradition, was not entirely alone. He was remembered as the first and greatest of a group, a series of sages who came in that first age before the flood, guardians of divine knowledge, teachers of humanity, half human and half something else. To understand the full shape of the Mesopotamian memory of the civilizers, we have to meet them, the 7 sages, the Apkallu. Oannes, for all his vividness, was not remembered as a solitary figure. In the fuller Mesopotamian tradition, he was the first and greatest of a group, the opening figure in a series of beings who came in that first age to guide and teach humanity. The Mesopotamians called these beings the Apkallu, and in our language they are usually called the 7 sages. To understand the Apkallu is to understand something important about how the ancient Mesopotamians thought about knowledge and where they believed it came from. Because for them, the deepest and most essential wisdom was not something humanity had worked out for itself. It was antediluvian. It belonged to the age before the flood. It had been brought and established by these sages in the beginning, and everything that came after was, in a sense, an inheritance from that first age of divine instruction. Let us understand who the Apkallu were. According to the tradition, the Apkallu were sages who lived before the Great Flood in the earliest days of the world, and who served as counselors and advisors to the first kings. In Mesopotamian belief, kingship itself was a divine institution, something that had descended from heaven to establish order among humanity. And alongside each of the earliest legendary kings who ruled before the flood, there stood one of these sages, an Apkallu, advising him, guiding him, and above all, transmitting divine knowledge and the arts of civilization to the human world. The kings ruled, the sages taught. There were 7 of them in the classic tradition, 7 sages for the 7 legendary kings of the age before the flood. And the first of these 7, the foremost and greatest, was the very being we have already met. Oannes, the fishman who rose from the sea, was remembered as the first of the Apkallu, the founding sage, the one who inaugurated the transmission of civilization. The others followed, each associated with one of the primeval kings, each carrying forward the work of instruction and guidance. And like Oannes, the Apkallu were not fully human. They were something in between, beings that combined human and non-human features, marked as belonging partly to the divine or natural world beyond humanity. In the imagery that survives, some of the Apkallu are depicted like Oannes as fish-like beings, clad in the garb of a fish, men wearing or emerging from the form of a great fish, carrying the same amphibious, waterborne character as their founder. Others are depicted with the features of birds, human bodies with the heads or wings of birds of prey, winged guardian figures. They were hybrid beings, neither wholly human nor wholly animal nor wholly divine, occupying a threshold, a boundary between the human world and the realms beyond it. This hybrid nature is itself significant. It marks them, like Oannes, as figures from outside, beings who bridge the human and the more than human, fit to carry knowledge across that divide. What did the Apkallu do? Their essential role was the same as Oannes, extended across the whole first age. They were the bringers and guardians of divine knowledge. They established the arts of civilization, the crafts, the sciences, the rituals, the ordering wisdom that made civilized life possible. They were associated with the founding of the great cities, with the establishment of the temples, with the transmission of the essential knowledge upon which Mesopotamian civilization rested. They were, in the fullest sense, the culture bearers, the ones through whom the knowledge of the gods was delivered into human hands in that first age before the flood. And that phrase, before the flood, is crucial because it carries a particular weight in this tradition, and it connects the Apkallu to one of the deepest themes in all of ancient thought. The Apkallu belonged to the antediluvian world, the age before the great deluge that, in Mesopotamian belief, as in so many others, swept over the earth and destroyed the world of the beginning. The wisdom of the Apkallu was the wisdom of that lost first age, and there is a haunting logic here. The most profound and essential knowledge had to be established before the flood, brought by the sages in the primeval days, precisely because the flood would come and wash that first world away. The sages and the knowledge they brought belonged to a world that was destroyed. This raises a question the tradition itself was deeply concerned with. If the flood destroyed the first world, how did the knowledge of the Apkallu survive to reach later humanity? And the tradition had answers that reveal how precious this antediluvian wisdom was thought to be. There were traditions that the essential knowledge was preserved through the flood, hidden away and recovered afterward, buried and then dug up again, so that the wisdom of the sages could be carried across the great divide of the deluge and into the world that came after. The knowledge of the first age was too precious to be lost, and so it was, in the telling, deliberately preserved through the catastrophe, a bridge of wisdom spanning from the world before the flood to the world after it. And the memory of the Apkallu did not fade quickly. These sages were remembered, honored, and invoked for a very long time across the whole span of Mesopotamian civilization. They were not merely a story about the distant past. Their figures were used in ritual and protection. Small images of the Apkallu, figurines representing these hybrid sages, were buried in the foundations of buildings, placed in the ground beneath houses and structures, to guard and protect, to invoke the power of the ancient sages against evil and harm. The 7 sages were called upon in incantations, remembered as sources of protective and healing power, their names and their nature carried forward through the centuries. The memory of the beings who brought civilization was kept alive, ritually, protectively for millennia. So what do we make of the Apkallu, honestly? The mundane reading sees them, like Oannes, as theological and symbolic figures, a way for Mesopotamian culture to express its conviction that civilization and its essential knowledge were of divine origin, established in the beginning by the gods through their agents. The hybrid fish and bird imagery reflects their liminal, divine-adjacent nature, their role as bridges between the human and the divine. The association with the age before the flood reflects the deep human sense that the foundations of things were laid in a primeval time, a first age of origins now lost. On this reading, the Apkallu are a sophisticated mythological system for honoring the divine origins of knowledge, not a memory of literal non-human teachers. And there is real weight to this. The Apkallu clearly functioned within a rich theological and ritual system tied to Mesopotamian ideas about kingship, divinity, the deep waters, and the flood. They are not free-floating memories, but deeply embedded religious figures, and much about them is best understood as theology rather than history. But notice once again what the mundane reading does not fully dissolve. Notice the pattern. Here, at the dawn of the written record, we do not merely have a single teacher. We have an entire tradition, systematic and elaborate, built around the same core idea. That civilization was brought to humanity in the beginning by beings from outside, part human and part something else, who came in the first age, delivered the arts of civilization, and were remembered as the source of all essential knowledge. Whether we read them as symbols or as memories, the Mesopotamians built their entire understanding of the origins of civilization around the figure of the non-human teacher, the sage who brought the gift. And that is the pattern we are tracing, present here in its most developed and systematic form at the very beginning of history. The Apkallu give us the Mesopotamian civilizers in their fullest form, the 7 sages who taught the world before the flood. But behind the sages, in the Mesopotamian imagination, stood a greater and more powerful category of beings, the gods themselves. The mighty ones who, in the deepest layers of the tradition, were said to have created humanity in the first place and to have established the whole order of the world. And it is one particular group of these gods that has, in modern times, become the most famous and the most controversial of all the civilizers. A name that has launched 1,000 theories, the Anunnaki. We come now to a name that carries more weight and more controversy than perhaps any other in this entire subject. A name that has, over the past half-century, escaped from the dusty world of ancient tablets and become a fixture of a vast modern mythology invoked in countless books and videos and late-night conversations about the true origins of humanity, the Anunnaki. For many people today, the word Anunnaki means one very specific thing. It means an ancient race of extraterrestrial beings who came to Earth in the distant past, who genetically engineered humanity from primitive ancestors to serve as a slave species, who mined gold and ruled as gods, and who are woven into a grand hidden history of human origins. That is the modern Anunnaki. The Anunnaki of the ancient astronaut theory, and it is enormously popular. But there is another Anunnaki, the original one, the Anunnaki of the actual ancient Mesopotamian texts, the ones the Sumerians and Babylonians actually wrote about thousands of years ago. And one of the most important things we can do in this entire documentary, in the name of the honesty that separates us from the pseudo-history of this genre, is to hold these two Anunnaki side by side and understand clearly how they differ and where the modern version comes from and what the tablets actually say. So let us do exactly that, carefully and fairly to both. Let us begin with the ancient texts, the primary sources, the words the Mesopotamians themselves left behind. Who were the Anunnaki in the original record? In the Sumerian and later Mesopotamian religious texts, the Anunnaki were gods, deities of the Mesopotamian pantheon. The word refers broadly to a group or assembly of the great gods, the powerful divine beings who govern the cosmos. In the varied and shifting theology of Mesopotamia, the term was used in different ways at different times, but at its core it designated divine beings, members of the pantheon, often associated with the ordering of the world, with the establishment of destinies, and in some texts, particularly with the underworld and the powers that governed it. They were, in short, gods, in the full religious sense, worshipped, feared, invoked, part of the elaborate and sophisticated religious system of one of humanity's first civilizations. And in the great Mesopotamian creation stories, the gods, including these divine assemblies, are indeed connected to the creation of humanity, and here the ancient texts do contain something that resonates faintly with the modern retelling, though in a very different key. In the Mesopotamian accounts of creation, there is a recurring and striking idea about why humanity was made. Humanity was created in these stories to serve the gods, to bear their burden, to do their labor, The logic of the myth runs like this. In the beginning, the lesser gods were burdened with the hard labor of maintaining the world, digging the rivers and canals, working the earth, the toil that kept the cosmos running. And the lesser gods grew weary of this labor and rebelled against it or complained of it. And so, to relieve the gods of their toil, humanity was created, fashioned by the divine craftsman, made from clay and mixed, in some accounts, with the blood or the essence of a god, precisely in order to take over the labor. Humanity was made to work so that the gods could rest. We were created in this ancient vision as servants of the gods to bear the burden they no longer wish to bear. Now you can already see how this ancient idea, humanity created to labor for the gods, could be reshaped in a modern retelling into humanity created to labor for extraterrestrial masters. The raw material is there in the original texts. But notice what the original texts do not say. They do not describe spacecraft or other planets or genetic engineering or gold mining or extraterrestrials in any sense we would recognize. The Anunnaki of the tablets are gods, divine beings in a religious cosmology, and the creation of humanity to serve them is a theological statement about the relationship between the human and the divine, about why we exist and what we owe to the powers above us. It is myth and theology in the proper sense, not a garbled memory of alien contact. So where does the modern version come from? How did the divine Anunnaki of the ancient texts become the extraterrestrial engineers of modern legend? This is where we have to talk honestly and directly about a particular modern author and a particular set of ideas, because the popular Anunnaki mythology is, to a remarkable degree, the creation of one man and his interpretation. In the latter part of the 20th century, a writer named Zecharia Sitchin produced a series of enormously popular books that presented a radical reinterpretation of the ancient Mesopotamian texts. Sitchin claimed to have found, encoded in the Sumerian records, the true history that the myths concealed. According to his interpretation, the Anunnaki were extraterrestrials from a distant planet, a planet he called by a particular name and placed on a long, elongated orbit through our solar system. He claimed these beings had come to Earth in the remote past in search of gold, that they had created humanity through genetic manipulation of existing hominids to serve as a workforce in their minds, and that the whole of Mesopotamian mythology was, in fact, a historical record of these events, misunderstood as religion by everyone until he decoded it. This is the source more than any other single source of the modern Anunnaki mythology in its full, elaborate form. And here honesty requires us to be clear, even though it cuts against the sensational version. Sitchin's interpretation is rejected comprehensively and essentially unanimously by the scholars who actually study these texts, the Assyriologists and specialists in ancient Mesopotamian language and literature. And their objections are not vague dismissals, they are specific and serious. They point out that Sitchin's translations do not match what the words in the texts actually mean, that his readings of particular terms and passages are, according to those who can read the original languages, simply incorrect. They point out that the astronomical claims do not hold up, that the extra planet on its long orbit is not supported by the evidence. They point out that he read into the texts things that are not there and ignored the actual religious and mythological context in which the texts were written. In the judgment of the people best equipped to evaluate it, the extraterrestrial Anunnaki thesis is not a valid reading of the Mesopotamian record. It is a modern invention built on mistranslation and imaginative reinterpretation, projected back onto ancient texts that say something quite different. We say this plainly because our whole approach depends on telling you the truth about the evidence, even when the truth is less thrilling than the legend. The Anunnaki of the tablets are gods, not aliens. The slave species mining gold narrative is a modern construction, not an ancient record. And yet, here is where we hold the door open honestly, rather than simply closing the case. Because even after we have set the modern reinterpretation aside, something in the genuine ancient material still speaks to our theme, and it is worth seeing clearly. Strip away Sitchin entirely, go back to the real texts, and you still find this. A tradition in which divine beings, powerful ones from the realm of the gods, created humanity, established the order of the world, founded kingship and the institutions of civilization, and stood as the source from which human beings received their existence and their purpose. The real Mesopotamian religion really does present civilization and humanity itself as things established by powerful beings from beyond the human world. The gods really are, in the authentic tradition, the ultimate source of the ordered world and everything in it. So the Anunnaki belong in our story, not as the extraterrestrials of modern legend, but as one more expression in the deepest layer of the Mesopotamian imagination of the same conviction we have been tracing, that humanity and its civilization did not arise on their own, but were established, given, ordered by powerful beings from outside the human world. The modern mythology took that genuine ancient conviction and reshaped it into a story of ancient astronauts. The reshaping is not historically valid, but the underlying pattern it seized upon, the pattern of the world, and its knowledge being handed to humanity by greater beings, is genuinely there in the ancient record, and it is the very pattern that connects Mesopotamia to every other culture we will visit. There is a lesson here too about this whole subject, and it is worth naming before we move on. The story of the Anunnaki shows us how a real ancient tradition can be transformed in modern hands into something the original never contained, and how a genuine pattern, the civilizer, the divine giver of the world, can be seized upon and inflated into a specific, elaborate, and unfounded historical claim. As we continue, we will keep encountering this dynamic, the genuine mystery of the pattern, and the modern temptation to overread it into certainty. Our task is to honor the genuine mystery while resisting the false certainty, to feel the real strangeness of the recurring civilizer without pretending we have decoded a literal history that the evidence does not support. We turn now to a version of the civilizer that we have met before in our journeys, but that belongs here too, seen through a new lens. For in Mesopotamia, the gods gave civilization as a gift and a blessing. But there was another tradition, close by and deeply connected, in which the giving of divine knowledge to humanity was not a blessing at all, but a transgression, a crime, a curriculum that was forbidden, handed down by beings who fell in the giving of it, the teachers who taught what was never meant to be taught. The Watchers. So far, the civilizers we have met have been, on the whole, benefactors. Oannes rose from the sea to lift humanity out of savagery. The Apkallu guarded and transmitted the wisdom that made civilization possible. Even the gods who created humanity to labor did so within an order that, however demanding, was the foundation of the world. The gift of knowledge in these traditions was a blessing, a raising up, a good thing given to a people who had nothing. But there is another version of the story, a darker one, a version in which the giving of divine knowledge to humanity was not a blessing but a violation, not a gift but a theft or a betrayal, a version in which the teachers who came down and instructed humanity were not honored sages but fallen beings, and in which the knowledge they delivered did not civilize the world so much as corrupt it. This is the civilizer turned inside out, the teacher as transgressor, and we find it in the tradition of the beings called the Watchers. We have encountered the Watchers before in our journeys, and some of what follows will be familiar, but here we meet them in a new light, specifically as civilizers, as bringers of knowledge, and we will see how their story is the shadow side of the very pattern we are tracing, the same act of teaching, cast now as a crime. The fullest account of the Watchers comes from the ancient text known as the Book of Enoch, which preserves and elaborates a tradition rooted in the opening chapters of Genesis, where we are told cryptically that in the days before the flood, divine beings, the sons of God, came down and took human wives, and that there were giants in the earth in those days. The Book of Enoch takes that brief and haunting notice and unfolds it into a detailed and dramatic narrative. And at the heart of that narrative is the theme of forbidden knowledge. According to the tradition, the Watchers were angelic beings, members of the heavenly host, set to watch over the earth and its people. And a group of them, a substantial number led by named leaders, looked down upon humanity and were drawn to the daughters of men and chose to descend, to come down to the earth and to take human wives. This descent, this crossing of the boundary between heaven and earth, was itself a transgression, a violation of the order that was meant to separate the divine from the human. But the transgression did not end with the taking of wives. It extended into teaching, into the delivery of knowledge. And this is what makes the Watchers civilizers, and civilizers of a very particular and troubling kind. For the Watchers, having come down, taught humanity things, and the tradition is remarkably specific about what they taught, laying out something like a curriculum, a syllabus of forbidden knowledge, subject by subject. And when you look at what that curriculum contains, you find something striking. It is, to a significant degree, the knowledge of civilization. But civilization seen from a darker angle, its gifts reframed as dangers. Consider what the Watchers are said to have taught. One of their leaders taught humanity the working of metals. He taught them how to take the ores of the earth and forge them, how to make the implements of metal. And specifically, the tradition emphasizes he taught them to make weapons of war, swords and knives and shields and the instruments of killing, and also to make the ornaments of luxury, the bracelets and the adornments, and the arts of beautifying the body. Others taught sorcery and enchantments, the working of magic, the casting of spells, the arts of the occult. Others taught the cutting of roots, the knowledge of plants and their powers, which shades into both medicine and poison. Others taught the reading of the heavens, the signs of the stars, the courses of the sun and moon, the knowledge of the sky, astrology, and the interpretation of celestial signs. One taught the making of cosmetics, the coloring and adorning of the face and eyes. Look closely at that list, because it is doing something subtle and important. This is recognizably a body of civilized knowledge: metallurgy, medicine and pharmacology, astronomy, cosmetics and adornment, the arts of magic and ritual. These are the kinds of skills and sciences that, in the other traditions we have examined, are precisely the gifts of the benevolent civilizer, the very contents of the civilization that Oannes and the Apkallu delivered as blessings. But here, in the tradition of the Watchers, the same kinds of knowledge are cast in an entirely different light. They are forbidden, they are transgressive, they are knowledge that humanity was not meant to have, delivered by beings who had no right to deliver it, and their effect on the world was not to raise it up, but to corrupt it. And that is the crucial difference and the dark heart of this version of the story. In the Watcher's tradition, the knowledge itself, or at least the premature and illicit giving of it, is a cause of ruin. The teaching of metalworking becomes the teaching of weapons and warfare, and the world fills with violence. The teaching of cosmetics and adornment becomes a source of vanity and seduction and corruption. The teaching of sorcery spreads occult danger through the world. The forbidden curriculum does not civilize humanity in the sense of ennobling it. It corrupts humanity, accelerates its descent into violence and wickedness, and helps bring about the very state of corruption that, in the tradition, leads God to send the flood to cleanse the earth. The teaching of the Watchers is one of the causes of the catastrophe. Knowledge, given too soon and by the wrong hands, becomes a poison. This is a profound and unsettling inversion of the civilizer pattern, and it is worth pausing to feel its full weight. Everywhere else, the teacher who brings knowledge is a hero, a benefactor, a savior who lifts humanity out of darkness. Here, the teacher who brings knowledge is a villain, or at least a transgressor, whose gift is a curse, whose instruction dooms the world. Same act, same transmission of civilized knowledge from divine beings to humanity, opposite meaning. In one telling it is salvation, in the other it is corruption. And this inversion tells us something important about the deep ambivalence at the heart of the whole idea of the gift of knowledge. Because knowledge really is ambivalent. The same metallurgy that makes the plow makes the sword. The same knowledge of plants that heals can poison. The same mastery of the heavens that guides the farmer can feed superstition and manipulation. The knowledge that builds civilization is the same knowledge that can destroy it. And the human traditions that remember the civilizers seem to have felt this ambivalence deeply. Most cultures emphasized the blessing and honored the teacher as a benefactor, but this darker tradition seized on the danger and remembered the teacher as a corrupter, the giver of a knowledge that was too powerful, too dangerous, given too soon to a humanity not ready to bear it. There is a further resonance here worth noticing, one that connects the Watchers to a theme that runs through many of the world's traditions. The idea that the acquisition of certain knowledge is itself a kind of fall, a transgression against a boundary that was meant to hold. It echoes, of course, the story of the garden, where the eating from the tree of knowledge is the primal transgression, the reaching for a knowledge that was forbidden. It echoes the Greek story of the fire stolen from the gods and given to humanity, a gift of civilization that was also a theft, punished severely by the divine powers. Again and again, human traditions circle around this uneasy intuition, that there is knowledge that raises us up, and that in the very act of receiving it, we transgress, we overreach, we take what was not freely given. The civilizer, in this shadow form, is bound up with the sense that our civilization itself was born of a kind of stolen fire, a forbidden gift, a knowledge that came to us across a boundary that perhaps should not have been crossed. So the Watchers give us the civilizer's dark twin. The teacher who came down from above delivered the knowledge of civilization, and in doing so transgressed and corrupted, bringing not only the gift but the ruin that followed from it. It is the same fundamental event we have been tracing, divine beings handing humanity the knowledge that makes civilization, but seen through a lens of danger and transgression rather than blessing and gratitude. And now, having seen the civilizer in the ancient Near East, both in his benevolent form and in his dark and forbidden form, we are going to do something that will test the whole pattern in the most dramatic way possible. We are going to leave the ancient world entirely and come forward to modern times and travel to a remote part of West Africa, to a people who, in the 20th century, were reported to have preserved a startling tradition, a tradition of amphibian teachers who came from the sky, from the region of a particular distant star. A tradition that seems to echo Oannes, the fishman from the sea, across thousands of years and thousands of miles, and a tradition that has become one of the most famous and most fiercely debated cases in this entire field, the Dogon. We now make a dramatic leap. We leave the ancient clay tablets of Mesopotamia behind, and we come forward across thousands of years into the 20th century. And we travel to a remote region of West Africa, to a people living in the cliffs and plateaus of Mali, a people with a rich and intricate traditional cosmology, the Dogon. The Dogon have become, over the past several decades, one of the most famous and most fiercely debated cases in this entire subject. Because according to reports that emerged in the 20th century, this West African people preserved in their traditional lore a body of knowledge that seemed impossible for them to possess. Knowledge about a distant star and traditions of amphibious beings who came from the heavens to instruct humanity. Beings that echo with startling closeness. The fishman Oannes we met at the very beginning of our journey on the other side of the world and thousands of years earlier. Let us lay out the claim as it came to the wider world in its full and striking form, and then let us examine it honestly, because this is a case where the honest examination is just as fascinating as the claim itself. The story reached the West primarily through the work of anthropologists who studied the Dogon in the 20th century, living among them, learning their traditions, and recording their cosmology. According to what these researchers reported, the Dogon possessed an elaborate body of secret traditional knowledge, and at the center of it was a particular star. Specifically, the report said the Dogon had traditions concerning the star we call Sirius, the brightest star in the night sky. But not just Sirius itself. The Dogon, according to these reports, knew that Sirius had a companion, a second star, invisible to the naked eye, a small but incredibly dense and heavy star, orbiting the bright star Sirius over a period of about 50 years. Now here is why that claim caused such a sensation. Because Sirius does in fact have exactly such a companion. It is a small, extraordinarily dense star, a white dwarf, invisible without a telescope, orbiting the main star over a period of roughly 50 years. This is a genuine astronomical fact, but it is not something you can see with the naked eye. It requires powerful telescopes to detect, and its true nature as an incredibly dense object was only understood by modern astronomy relatively recently. So the question exploded. How could a traditional West African people without telescopes possess knowledge of an invisible companion star, its approximately 50-year orbit, and its extraordinary density? Knowledge that modern science itself had only recently acquired, and it did not stop with the star. According to the reports, the Dogon connected this astronomical knowledge to a tradition of visitors, beings associated with the Sirius system who were said to have come to the Earth and who were described in a very particular way. Amphibious beings, creatures associated with water, part fish or fish-like, who descended from the sky and brought knowledge to humanity. The Dogon called such a being in the reports by a name given as Nomo, an amphibious ancestral spirit, or being connected to water and to the sky, a teacher, a bringer of order and knowledge. Stop and feel the force of that. An amphibious teacher, part fish, associated with water, coming from the heavens to instruct humanity. This is Oannes. This is, in its essential features, the very same figure we met in the oldest records of Mesopotamia, the fishman who rose from the sea to civilize the world. And here it is again in West Africa in the 20th century, apparently arising from a completely independent tradition on the far side of the world, separated from ancient Sumer by thousands of miles and thousands of years. The amphibian civilizer appearing twice at opposite ends of the earth. If the connection is real, it is one of the most extraordinary coincidences in the entire study of human culture, and it would seem to point toward exactly the kind of shared worldwide memory that the extraordinary reading of our whole subject proposes. That is the claim in its full, thrilling form. And now, because honesty is the thread that must run through this entire documentary, we have to examine it carefully, because the Dogon case, for all its fame and all its power, is genuinely and seriously contested. And the skeptical account of it is not a lazy dismissal, but a substantive and troubling challenge that we are obligated to present fairly. The central problem is the possibility of contamination, that is, the possibility that the astronomical knowledge attributed to the Dogon did not come from ancient tradition at all, but entered Dogon culture from outside in relatively modern times, from contact with Europeans who already knew about the companion star of Sirius. Consider the timing. By the time the anthropologists were living among the Dogon and recording their traditions in the 20th century, the existence and nature of the companion star of Sirius were already known to Western science and had been discussed in popular and scientific literature. Europeans, including missionaries, travelers, and the researchers themselves, had been in contact with the region. And so the critical question arises: did the Dogon possess this knowledge from ancient independent tradition, or did they acquire it more recently through contact with outsiders who already knew it, absorbing it into their evolving cosmology, so that when anthropologists arrived and asked about the stars, the knowledge was reflected back to them, now woven into Dogon lore? This is not an idle worry. It is a serious and well-grounded concern, and there are specific reasons to take it seriously. Later researchers who went to study the Dogon were sometimes unable to confirm the elaborate Sirius knowledge in the form originally reported, raising questions about how widespread and how consistent this knowledge actually was within Dogon society, and about how much the original account may have been shaped by the particular circumstances of its collection, including the interaction between the researchers and their informants. There are also serious questions about the methods and interpretations of the original research, about how the questions were asked, how the answers were understood and translated, and how much the framework of the researchers may have influenced what was recorded. The concern, in short, is that we may be looking not at ancient independent knowledge, but at a more recent cultural blending in which modern astronomical facts were absorbed into a living tradition and then mistaken for ancient wisdom. We have to be clear and honest. The contamination explanation is, in the judgment of many careful observers, the most likely account of the astronomical knowledge specifically. The idea that the Dogon independently knew from ancient times the density and orbital period of an invisible star is not well supported once the possibility of modern contact is taken seriously, and the evidence for genuine, ancient, uncontaminated transmission of that specific knowledge is weak. Intellectual honesty requires us to say this plainly, and not to present the serious mystery as a solved case of impossible ancient knowledge, because on the best assessment, it very likely is not. And yet, once again, we hold the door open because there is something here that the contamination explanation does not fully account for, and it is the part that matters most for our theme. The contamination explanation addresses the astronomical knowledge, the specific facts about the companion star, but it does not by itself explain the deeper and more haunting resonance. The figure of the amphibious teacher, the being from the sky associated with water, part fish, who brings knowledge to humanity, because that figure, the amphibian civilizer, is not a modern astronomical fact that could have been absorbed from a European visitor. It is a mythological pattern, and it echoes, remarkably, the same pattern we find in ancient Mesopotamia with Oannes, and, as we will see, in other cultures too. Now, the honest reading of even this deeper resonance is careful. It may be that the amphibian teacher is simply a widespread and natural mythological form, a shape the human imagination reaches for independently, water and its creatures being universal symbols of life, mystery, and the deep sources of things. The resemblance between the Nomo and Oannes may be a case of the human mind in different places, independently associating knowledge and origins with amphibious, waterborne beings, rather than evidence of any real historical connection or shared memory. That is a reasonable and probably the soundest reading. We should not overstate the case, and we should not pretend that the resemblance, however striking, proves a literal shared event. But we can say this much, and it is genuinely worth saying. The Dogon case, whatever its ultimate explanation, brings us face to face with the strange persistence of the amphibian teacher across human cultures. Whether by ancient memory, by natural mythological convergence, or by some mixture of tradition and modern contact, the figure of the fish being who comes to teach humanity appears in the oldest records of Mesopotamia and in the traditional cosmology of West Africa at opposite ends of the world. The specific Sirius claim may well dissolve under honest scrutiny, but the recurring shape of the waterborne civilizer remains one more instance of the pattern we are tracing, and one more invitation to wonder why this particular figure, the teacher from the water, haunts the human imagination so widely and so deeply. So we leave the Dogon with our honesty intact, having neither swallowed the sensational claim nor dismissed the genuine resonance. The star knowledge most likely came from modern contact. The amphibian teacher most likely is a widespread mythological form. And yet the pattern stands, and the fishman who rose from the sea in ancient Sumer finds his strange echo in the cliffs of Mali, and the recurrence, whatever its cause, is real. And now it is time to cross the greatest barrier of all, because everything we have examined so far, however far-flung, belongs to the interconnected world of Africa, Asia, and the ancient Near East. To truly test whether the civilizer is a universal pattern, we must go to a hemisphere that was cut off from all of it for thousands of years. We must cross the ocean to the Americas, where peoples who never heard of Oannes or the Anunnaki or the Watchers told nonetheless of bearded strangers who came from outside, gave them civilization, departed across the sea, and promised to return. Now we cross the ocean, and in doing so, we cross the single most important boundary in the entire study of this pattern. Everything we have examined so far, however scattered across the map, belongs to one interconnected world. Mesopotamia, the Near East, West Africa, all of them were part of the great landmass of the Old World, where peoples, however distant, were linked by long chains of contact, trade, and migration stretching back into deep prehistory. A skeptic can always argue that a shared story in that world spread along those ancient chains, passed from culture to culture over the ages. It is a reasonable argument, and it limits how much weight we can put on the old world parallels alone. But there is one place that argument cannot reach: the Americas. For thousands of years, since the end of the last ice age, the peoples of the Americas were cut off from the old world, separated by vast oceans, developing their civilizations in near total isolation. They never heard of Oannes. They never read Genesis or the Book of Enoch. They had no contact with Sumer or Egypt or the traditions of the Near East. If the civilizer pattern appears in the Americas too, in its full and characteristic form, then it cannot simply have spread from a single old world source. Its appearance on both sides of the ocean becomes something far harder to explain and far more significant. And it does appear. In the Americas, we find the civilizer in some of his most vivid and complete forms, carrying every element of the pattern we have been tracing. We will look at two of the greatest examples, one from Mesoamerica and one from the Andes. Let us begin in Mesoamerica, with one of the most important and famous figures in all of the pre-Columbian world, Quetzalcoatl. The name in the language of the Aztecs is often understood to mean the feathered serpent or the plumed serpent, and the image of a serpent adorned with the feathers of a magnificent bird is one of the most enduring symbols of ancient Mesoamerican civilization, appearing across many cultures of the region over a vast span of time. Quetzalcoatl was a deity of great importance, worshipped under related names and forms across Mesoamerica for centuries. But woven through the traditions surrounding him is a particular strand that concerns us directly: Quetzalcoatl as a civilizer, as a bringer of knowledge and culture to humanity. In the traditions, Quetzalcoatl is associated with the gift of civilization itself. He is connected with the bringing of knowledge, of learning, of the arts and crafts that sustain civilized life. Traditions credit him with the gift of agriculture, and in particular with humanity's relationship to maize, the sacred staple grain that was the foundation of Mesoamerican civilization. He is associated with the calendar, with the measurement of time, with astronomy, and the reckoning of the sacred cycles. He is connected with writing, with learning, with the priestly knowledge and the wisdom of the civilized order. He is associated with craft and the arts. In short, Quetzalcoatl stands in these traditions as a giver of the arts of civilization, a teacher and benefactor of humanity, the source of essential knowledge, exactly in the role of the civilizer we have been tracing across the world. And Quetzalcoatl carries the other elements of the pattern too, including some of the most striking. There is, running through the tradition surrounding him, the figure of a departure and a promise. In one of the most significant strands of the tradition, Quetzalcoatl, after his time among humanity, departs. He goes away, leaving the world of men. In some versions, he departs toward the east, toward the sea, sailing away across the water, or vanishing over the ocean, or passing into the horizon where the sun rises. And crucially, his departure is bound up with the expectation of return. Quetzalcoatl was believed in an important strand of tradition to have promised or to be destined to come back, to return one day from the direction in which he had vanished in an appointed year at the turning of an age. This promise of return would become, famously, one of the most consequential beliefs in the history of the Americas, and we will return to its full significance when we reach the promise itself in our final movement. For now, simply notice that Quetzalcoatl carries the complete script, a bringer of civilization and knowledge, a departure over the water toward the east, and a promise to return. The pattern in Mesoamerica is complete. Now let us travel south, down the spine of the continent, to the high Andes, to the world of the great Andean civilizations that would culminate in the empire of the Inca. And here we find another magnificent civilizer, in some ways even closer to the pure form of the pattern, Viracocha. Viracocha was, in the Andean tradition, a great creator god, one of the supreme deities of the Andean world, associated with the creation of the world, the sun, the moon, the stars, and humanity itself. But like the other figures we have met, Viracocha is not only a distant creator, he is also in the traditions a civilizer who walked the earth, who moved among the peoples, who taught, and the traditions surrounding his wanderings carry the civilizer pattern in remarkably clear form. According to the Andean traditions, Viracocha, in the time of origins, traveled across the land. He walked the earth, moving through the Andean world, and as he went, he taught. He brought the arts of civilization to the peoples. He taught them how to live, how to farm, how to order their society, the crafts and the knowledge and the ways of civilized life. He is described as a bringer of order and culture, moving through the land as a teacher and benefactor, establishing the foundations of civilization among the peoples he encountered. He is a wanderer teacher, a civilizer who comes among the people, delivers the gift of knowledge and culture, and moves on. And there are details in the traditions of Viracocha that echo hauntingly the other civilizers. He is sometimes described as appearing in the form of a man, and in some accounts as a tall figure, a bearded man, a stranger in appearance. This detail of the beard is one that has drawn enormous attention, because facial hair of that kind was not characteristic of the indigenous peoples of the region. And so the description of a bearded civilizer marks him once again as a figure from outside, a stranger, someone different from the people he came to teach. The same marking of the teacher as an outsider, a being apart, that we have seen throughout. And the departure, Viracocha, like Quetzalcoatl, in the end goes away. Having completed his work of teaching and civilizing, having traveled across the land bestowing his gifts, Viracocha departs. And in the tradition, his departure takes a form we now recognize deeply. He goes to the sea. He travels to the coast, to the edge of the ocean, and there he departs across the water, walking out upon the sea, or vanishing across the waves, leaving the world by the same great elsewhere from which so many of the civilizers come and to which so many return. The teacher who walked the land, giving civilization, withdraws at last across the ocean and is gone. Look at what we have found on this side of the world, in the isolated hemisphere of the Americas. We have found the civilizer, complete in both Mesoamerica and the Andes, a being marked as an outsider, sometimes bearded, sometimes serpent-feathered, but always a stranger apart from the people. A bringer of the full gift of civilization, agriculture, craft, calendar, law, knowledge, the arts of ordered life. A departure over the water, across the sea, and, with Quetzalcoatl, a promise of return. Every element of the pattern we first saw in Oannes appearing again in cultures that could not possibly have borrowed it from the old world, separated by an ocean and by thousands of years of isolation. This is the heart of why the civilizer pattern is so remarkable. It is not confined to one connected world. It leaps the ocean. It appears in its full and characteristic form among peoples who developed in complete isolation from the traditions of Sumer and Egypt and the Near East. And that fact demands to be reckoned with honestly from both directions. The mundane reading has serious answers, and we must give them their due because they carry real weight. Human beings everywhere, faced with the achievements of their ancestors and the mystery of where civilization came from, may naturally reach for the same kind of explanation: a divine teacher, a culture-bringing hero, a giver of the arts. The pattern may be universal, not because a real event was witnessed everywhere, but because the human mind everywhere works in similar ways and reaches for similar stories. The bearded outsider civilizer who departs over the sea may be a natural shape for the imagination to produce independently wherever people ask where their world came from. And we must add a note of real caution, because some of the details that make these American figures seem so strikingly to match the pattern, the beard, the departure over the sea, the promise of return, come to us through accounts recorded after European contact, and there are genuine questions about how much those later tellings may have been shaped, reshaped, or even partly projected by the very Europeans who recorded them. Honesty requires us to hold that uncertainty openly, and yet when all those cautions are granted, the extraordinary reading still presses its question, and it is a fair one. Why this pattern and not some other? Why does the civilizer everywhere so often come from outside, give the same comprehensive gift, depart over the water or into the sky, and promise to return? The mundane reading explains that similar minds produce similar stories, but the sheer specificity and consistency of the pattern across such vast separations remains genuinely striking, and it is the accumulation of that specificity, culture after culture, that gives this subject its enduring power. We do not claim it proves a literal shared event. We claim only that the recurrence is real and remarkable, and not fully dissolved by any easy answer. We have now met the civilizers of the old world and the new. There remains one more great civilization to visit, perhaps the most iconic of all, a civilization that remembered, more explicitly than almost any other, a golden first age, when the gods themselves walked the earth as kings and handed down the arts of civilization before departing. We turn to Egypt. There is one more great civilization we must visit, and it is fitting that we save it for last among the cultures we survey, because few peoples in all of human history preserved the memory of the civilizers more explicitly, more grandly, or more enduringly than the ancient Egyptians. For the Egyptians did not merely believe that the gods had given them knowledge. They believed that, in the beginning, the gods themselves had ruled Egypt, walking the earth as kings in a golden first age of the world, and that from that divine reign came the whole foundation of Egyptian civilization. The Egyptians called their gods, collectively, by a term rendered as the Neteru, the divine powers, the gods and goddesses of the vast and intricate Egyptian pantheon. And the Egyptians had a concept, a name for the primordial age of origins that lies at the very heart of our theme. They called it, in a phrase that has come down to us, Zep Tepi, the first time. Zep Tepi, the first time, was the golden age of beginnings, the primordial epoch when the world was young and the divine order was established. It was the time of creation, when the cosmos emerged from the primeval waters and the fundamental order of the world was set in place. And crucially, in the Egyptian understanding, it was the time when the gods, the Neteru, ruled directly upon the earth. Before there were human pharaohs, the tradition held Egypt had been governed by divine kings, by the gods themselves reigning as sovereigns, and after them by a line of semi-divine beings, and only later did rule pass to human kings. There had been, in the deep past, an age when gods walked among men and ruled as kings, and it was in that first time that the foundations of everything were laid. This is a profoundly important expression of our pattern, and in some ways the grandest. For the Egyptians, civilization was not merely a gift handed down by a visiting teacher who came and left in a single generation. It was the legacy of an entire age of divine rule, a whole golden epoch when the gods governed the land and established in their reign the order, the knowledge, the institutions, and the arts upon which all of subsequent Egyptian civilization was built. The whole of Egyptian civilization looked back to Zep-Tepi as its source, the sacred age of origins from which the correct order of all things descended, the template that later ages sought to preserve and reproduce. Egyptian civilization understood itself as the inheritor and the maintainer of an order established by the gods in the first time. And within this grand vision, particular gods stand out as civilizers in the specific sense we have been tracing, as bringers of particular arts and knowledge to humanity. Let us meet two of the most important, and the first is Osiris. Osiris is one of the most significant of all the Egyptian gods, central to Egyptian religion, famous above all for his role as the god of the dead, the ruler of the afterlife, and the figure at the heart of one of the most important sacred stories in Egyptian tradition, the story of his death and resurrection. But before and beneath that role, Osiris carries a tradition as a civilizer, and it is a tradition that fits our pattern with striking precision. For Osiris was remembered as a divine king who had ruled Egypt in the ancient time, and as a bringer of civilization to humanity. According to the tradition, Osiris, reigning as king in the early age, found humanity in a rude and uncivilized condition and lifted them out of it. He gave them agriculture, teaching humanity how to cultivate the earth, how to grow grain, how to plant and harvest, how to produce food through farming rather than living in a wild and savage state. He gave them laws, establishing justice and the ordered rule of society. He taught them the worship of the gods, the proper rituals and reverence. He is credited with turning humanity away from savagery and toward the settled, cultivated, law-governed life of civilization. And in some traditions, having civilized his own land, Osiris then traveled abroad to spread these gifts of civilization more widely, carrying the arts of civilized life to other peoples. Here again is the civilizer in his clearest form, a divine king who finds humanity in savagery and gives them agriculture, law, religion, and the arts of civilized life, raising them up out of their primitive state. The second god we must meet is Thoth. If Osiris represents the gift of the practical and social arts of civilization, Thoth represents something even more fundamental to our theme, the gift of knowledge itself and above all of writing. Thoth was the divine scribe, the god of wisdom, of learning, of writing, of knowledge in its deepest sense. He was regarded as the inventor or the giver of writing, the sacred art that stood at the very foundation of Egyptian civilization and Egyptian religion. He was the keeper of knowledge, the master of the sacred sciences, the patron of scribes and learning, the divine intelligence behind the recording and preservation of wisdom. He was associated with mathematics, with astronomy, with the measurement of time, with medicine and magic, with all the domains of learned knowledge. He was, in essence, the god of knowledge as such, the divine source and guardian of the intellectual arts of civilization. Consider the significance of Thoth for our pattern. Here, at the foundation of one of the greatest civilizations of the ancient world, the essential arts of knowledge, and above all writing itself, the very thing that makes recorded civilization possible, are attributed not to human discovery but to a god, a divine giver of knowledge. Writing came from Thoth, knowledge came from Thoth. The intellectual foundations of civilization were, in the Egyptian understanding, a divine gift delivered by a God who was the keeper and the source of all wisdom. This is our pattern once more. The knowledge that builds civilization understood as something given from above by a divine being, rather than achieved from below by human effort alone. And Thoth carries one more element that resonates deeply with themes we have touched throughout this journey. Thoth, as the keeper of knowledge, was associated with sacred and hidden wisdom, with secret knowledge preserved and guarded, with mysteries recorded and kept. In later traditions, long after ancient Egypt, the figure associated with Thoth would become bound up with the idea of a great body of hidden, ancient, sacred wisdom, a lost knowledge of the deep past, secret teachings preserved from the earliest times. The god of knowledge became, in the later imagination, the symbol of a hidden and ancient wisdom, a knowledge from the first time that might yet be recovered. This connects Thoth to that recurring dream we have encountered again and again, the dream of an ancient hidden knowledge given in the beginning, guarded through the ages, waiting to be found. So Egypt gives us the civilizer pattern in perhaps its most majestic form, not a single teacher, but an entire golden age, the Zep Tepi, the first time, when the gods ruled the earth as kings and established the foundations of civilization. And within it, particular divine civilizers, Osiris, who gave agriculture and law and lifted humanity from savagery, Thoth, who gave writing and knowledge and guarded the sacred wisdom, an entire civilization that understood itself as the inheritor of a divine order established in a primeval golden age when the gods walked the earth and handed down everything. Now, the mundane reading of the Egyptian material is, as always, substantial, and we give it its due. The Neteru and Zep Tepi are, on this reading, profound theological and religious concepts, expressions of the Egyptian understanding of divine order, of the sacred origins of kingship and civilization, of the relationship between the divine and the human. The attribution of civilization's arts to the gods reflects the deep human tendency to sacralize the origins of essential things, to trace the foundations of the world to the divine. The golden first age of divine rule is a widespread mythological idea, the sense that the beginning was a time of gods and greatness from which later ages are a falling away. On this reading, Egyptian civilization built a magnificent religious cosmology around the divine origins of its world, and the Neteru and Zep Tepi are theology and myth of the highest order, not history. And this is a strong reading, deeply grounded in the way Egyptian religion actually worked. But once more, notice what it does not erase. Notice the pattern appearing yet again in this greatest of civilizations in the same characteristic form. The conviction that civilization was established in the beginning by beings from beyond the human world who ruled and taught and gave the arts of civilized life, and who then withdrew, leaving humanity to inherit and maintain what they had established. Whether we read it as theology or as memory, the Egyptians, like every other people we have visited, placed at the foundation of their world the figure of the divine civilizer, the giver of knowledge from the first time. We have now traveled the world. We have met the civilizers of Mesopotamia, of the world of the Watchers, of West Africa, of the Americas, and of Egypt. We have heard again and again in cultures that could not have shared these stories the same essential account of where civilization came from. And now it is time to do what we have been promising to do since the beginning. It is time to draw all of these figures together, to lay them side by side, and to isolate precisely the pattern that binds them, the shared script of the teacher who came and taught and left, and to weigh as honestly as we can what that pattern might truly mean. We have traveled the world. We have descended into the clay tablets of Mesopotamia and stood on the cliffs of Mali. We have crossed the ocean to the temples of Mesoamerica and the high passes of the Andes, and we have entered the golden first time of Egypt. And everywhere we have gone, we have met the same figure, wearing different faces, speaking different languages, but playing again and again the same role. Now it is time to lay them all side by side and to see the pattern whole, because it is only when you gather the civilizers together from every corner of the earth that the full strangeness of the recurrence becomes clear. Let us assemble them and trace element by element the shared script that binds them across the world. Begin with the first element, arrival from outside. In culture after culture, the teacher is not one of the people. He comes from elsewhere, from beyond the human world, marked as a stranger, a being apart. And notice with particular care where he comes from, because the consistency here is remarkable. He comes over and over from the water or from the sky. Oannes rose from the sea, the fishman emerging from the Persian Gulf. The Apkallu were waterborne sages clad in the form of the fish. The Nomo of the Dogon tradition were amphibious beings associated with water and with the sky and with a distant star. The watchers descended from the heavens, coming down from above. Viracocha, in the end, is bound to the sea, and the civilizers of the Americas depart and are expected to return across the ocean. Water and sky, the deep and the heavens, the two great elsewheres, the two boundaries of the human world. And it is from across these boundaries that the civilizers so consistently come. This is one of the most striking features of the entire pattern, the persistent association of the teacher with water and with sky, with the sea and with the stars. Now the second element, the gift of knowledge, and here the consistency is total. In every case, the civilizer gives, and what he gives is civilization itself in its fullness. Look at the recurring contents of the gift, the same items appearing again and again across unconnected cultures. Agriculture, the cultivation of the earth, the growing of food given by Oannes, by Osiris, by Quetzalcoatl, by Viracocha, taught everywhere. Writing, the sacred art of recording given by Oannes, given by Thoth, the foundation of recorded civilization. Law and the ordering of society given by Oannes, by Osiris, by the civilizers of every land. Astronomy and the calendar, the reading of the heavens and the measurement of time, given again and again. Craft, architecture, medicine, the arts of building and healing and making. The same comprehensive toolkit, the same essential contents of civilized life delivered by the civilizer in culture after culture as a gift from beyond. The knowledge that makes us civilized, everywhere attributed to a teacher who brought it from outside. Now the third element, departure. The civilizer does not stay. Having given his gift, he withdraws, and this too is nearly universal. Oannes return to the sea each night and finally forever. The Apkallu belong to the age before the flood, which swept their world away. Osiris departed and in his myth met his death. Quetzalcoatl sailed away over the eastern sea. Viracocha walked out across the ocean and was gone. The teacher is always, in the end, a figure who leaves, whose presence among humanity was temporary, a visitation, and not a permanent dwelling. The gift is given, and the giver departs, returning to the water or the sky or the horizon from which he came. And the fourth element, the strangest and most haunting, the promise of return. So often, the departing civilizer leaves behind not only his gift but an expectation that he will come back. Quetzalcoatl was expected to return from the east in an appointed time. Viracocha's return was awaited. Across many of these traditions runs this thread of expectation, this sense that the departure was not final, that the teacher who gave us everything and then left would one day come back. We will devote our final movement to this promise, for it is the deepest and most consequential element of all. But note it here as the closing beat of the shared script, arrival from outside, over water or from the sky, the comprehensive gift of civilization, departure, a withdrawal back to the elsewhere, and the promise of return. That is the pattern. That is the script that plays out with remarkable fidelity in the sacred traditions of peoples scattered across the entire earth, many of whom could not possibly have shared these stories with one another. And the great question, the question this entire documentary has been building toward, is simply this: why? Why does this same story appear everywhere? What accounts for the pattern? We have promised throughout to weigh two readings honestly against each other, and now, with all the evidence before us, is the moment to do so in full. Let us give each its due. The mundane reading holds that the pattern is a product of the human mind and the human condition, arising independently in culture after culture without any need for a shared event. And this reading is genuinely powerful. Consider its strengths honestly. Human beings everywhere confronted the same profound mystery. They inherited civilization, its knowledge and arts already ancient, and they had no memory and no theory of how it had slowly developed. Faced with that mystery and faced with the sheer impressiveness of civilized knowledge, it would be natural, perhaps even inevitable, for peoples everywhere to conclude that such knowledge must have come from beings greater than themselves, from the gods, from divine teachers. It is natural to sacralize the origins of essential things, to trace the foundations of the world to the divine, rather than to the mundane efforts of ordinary ancestors. And the specific features of the pattern have natural explanations too. Why do the teachers come from water and sky? Because water and sky are the universal boundaries of the human world, the great mysterious elsewheres, the natural symbolic sources of life, mystery, and the divine in the imagination of virtually every people. Why is the gift always the same? Because civilization itself has the same essential contents everywhere: agriculture, writing, law, astronomy. So any story about the origin of civilization will naturally involve those same things. Why does the teacher depart? Because the gods are not present now, and a story of a past golden age of divine presence must explain the divine absence of the present, and departure explains it. On this reading, the pattern is universal, not because a real event was witnessed everywhere, but because the same human minds, facing the same mystery with the same materials, reliably produce the same story. The recurrence reflects the unity of human psychology, not the memory of a shared history. And to this, the mundane reading adds a sharpening caution we have met before, that some of the most striking details, especially in the later recorded traditions, may have been shaped or amplified in transmission, making the parallels look even tighter than they originally were. That is a strong case, an honest and substantial one, and the rational weight of the evidence leans toward it. We will not pretend otherwise, and yet the extraordinary reading remains standing and deserves its hearing too. It holds that the pattern is a memory, That the reason so many cultures tell the same story is that something really happened, some real event or events in the deep past, some genuine encounter in which knowledge was transmitted to early humanity from a source experienced as coming from outside, so profound and so formative that every branch of humanity carried its memory forward, each reshaping it into the language of its own gods and its own myths. On this reading, the recurring script is not the coincidental product of similar minds, but the scattered, distorted, but genuine recollection of a real transmission, the true origin of civilization preserved in mythologized form in the sacred memory of the whole human species. We must be clear and honest about the weakness of this reading, as we have been throughout. There is no direct physical proof of such an event, no artifact, no undeniable evidence of a real non-human teacher or a literal transmission from outside. The extraordinary reading rests on taking the pattern itself as its primary evidence, on the argument that the recurrence is too specific and too consistent to be mere coincidence, and that argument, however evocative, is not proof. It asks us to infer a hidden event from the shape of the world's myths, and that is a large inference, one the hard evidence does not compel. The genre that has embraced this reading has too often inflated it into false certainties, the ancient astronaut theory in its confident form, the decoded alien history, and those certainties go far beyond what can honestly be claimed. So where does an honest mind land, holding both? Perhaps here. The rational weight leans toward the mundane reading. Similar minds, facing the same mystery, with the same materials, most likely produce the same story independently, and that is the most defensible account of the pattern. But the mundane reading, for all its strength, leaves a residue it does not fully dissolve. And that residue is the genuine and remarkable specificity of the recurrence, the way the same distinctive script, down to the water and the sky and the departure and the promise, appears in such consistent form across such vast separations. That residue does not prove the extraordinary reading, but it is the reason the extraordinary reading will not die, and the reason this pattern has haunted the human imagination so persistently. The mystery is real, even if the solution most likely is not the thrilling one. And an honest person can feel at the same time the strong pull of the ordinary explanation and the lingering genuine strangeness that it does not entirely explain away. That is the pattern, and that is what it may and may not mean. But we have one thread still to follow, the deepest and most unsettling of all. For in tracing the civilizers, we have noticed again and again that they did not merely leave, they promised to come back. And that promise, it turns out, is not a minor detail. It is one of the most consequential ideas in all of human history, and it may not be finished with us yet. We have arrived at the final thread, and it is the strangest and most haunting of all. Because as we trace the civilizers across the world, we notice something that we set aside again and again, promising to return to it at the end. The teachers did not merely leave. So often, before they departed, they left behind a promise that they would come back. This is the last element of the pattern, and in some ways the most extraordinary, because it does something the others do not. It reaches forward. The arrival, the gift, the departure, all of these are about the past, about how civilization came to be. But the promise of return is about the future. It plants at the very origin of civilization an expectation that points forward through all of history toward a day still to come. It means that the story of the civilizer is not finished. It has an ending that has not yet arrived. and it means that humanity, in a strange and profound sense, has been left waiting. Let us gather the promise as we gathered the pattern. Across culture after culture, the departing civilizer is bound up with the expectation of return. Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica was believed to have departed toward the east, over the sea, and to have promised or to be destined to return from that same direction in an appointed time at the turning of an age. Viracocha's return was awaited in the Andes, and beyond the specific figures, the theme recurs widely, this sense that the golden age of the teachers, the time when the divine walked among humanity, was not gone forever, but would somehow come again. The one who gave us everything and then left would, one day, return. Now, why would this element be so widespread? Why would so many traditions attach to the departure of the civilizer this promise of return? There is a deep logic to it, and understanding that logic helps us see what the promise really means in human terms. Consider the situation of a people who believe their civilization was given to them by a divine teacher in a golden past. They live in the aftermath of that gift. The teacher is gone. The golden age is over. They inhabit a diminished present, a world from which the divine presence has withdrawn, looking back on a lost age of greatness when the gods walked the earth. That is a poignant and difficult place to stand in the long shadow of a departed glory. And the promise of return answers that longing. It holds out hope. It says that the withdrawal is not permanent, that the diminished present is not the final state, that the golden age will come again, that the teacher will return and set things right and restore what was lost. The promise of return is the promise of restoration, of the healing of the absence, of the recovery of the lost golden age. It transforms the story from a tale of pure loss into a story of loss and future redemption. It gives the waiting a hope. And this is a pattern that runs extraordinarily deep in the human religious imagination, far beyond the specific civilizer traditions we have traced. The expectation of a returning divine figure, a coming savior, a restoration of a lost golden age, an awaited one who will come to set the world right, appears across the religious traditions of humanity in countless forms. The hope for the return of the divine, the awaited restoration, the one who is to come, is one of the most widespread and enduring of all human religious hopes. The promise of the civilizer's return taps into this deep vein, this universal longing for the return of what was lost and the coming of what is hoped for. But the promise of return is not only a matter of inner longing and religious hope. It has, at least once in recorded history, collided with real events in a way that makes it one of the most consequential ideas humanity has ever held. And we have to speak of this carefully and honestly, because it is a case where legend, history, and later reinterpretation have become deeply tangled. The famous case concerns Quetzalcoatl and the arrival of the Europeans in the Americas. There is a widespread and dramatic story, often told, that when the Spanish arrived in Mexico, the Aztecs, because of their tradition that Quetzalcoatl would return from the east in an appointed year, initially received the strange bearded newcomers who came from across the eastern sea as the returning god or the emissaries of the returning god, and that this belief shaped and fatally weakened their response to the invaders. It is a stunning story, a prophecy of return, planted at the origin of civilization, apparently reaching across the ages to shape the fate of an empire at the moment of contact, as the promise of the returning teacher seemed to be fulfilled by strangers arriving from over the sea. And here, honesty requires real care because this dramatic story, however powerful, is genuinely disputed by historians. Many scholars now regard the neat version of it, the Aztecs simply mistaking the Spanish for the returning Quetzalcoatl as at least partly a later construction, shaped after the fact in the accounts written down in the aftermath of the conquest, possibly influenced by the Europeans themselves and by later retellings, rather than a straightforward record of what the Aztecs actually believed in the moment. The real history of the encounter was far more complex than the tidy legend of the mistaken god, and we should not present the dramatic version as simple, established fact. The truth of what the Aztecs believed and how the returning god tradition actually shaped events is tangled and contested, and much of the clean story may be hindsight. But notice, and this is the essential point, that even the disputed status of the story testifies to the power of the idea. Whether or not the Aztecs literally mistook the Spanish for Quetzalcoatl in the moment, the fact that this explanation arose at all, that it seemed compelling, that it took hold and has been told and retold for centuries, shows how deeply the promise of the returning civilizer had lodged in the imagination on both sides. The idea of the returning teacher was potent enough that it became the framework through which a world-changing encounter was understood and remembered, whether in the moment or in the retelling. The promise of return shaped not only ancient hope, but the very way history was told. That is a measure of its power. And now, at the very end of our journey, let us step back and feel the full weight of the pattern we have traced and of the promise that closes it. We began by questioning the story we tell ourselves, that we built civilization alone by our own slow effort, and we found that the ancient world, almost universally, told a different story. That civilization was given, handed to humanity by teachers who came from outside, who delivered the whole toolkit of civilized life, and who then departed, leaving behind so often a promise to return. We met these civilizers across the whole earth, in cultures that could not have shared the story, and we found the same script again and again, with a consistency that is genuinely remarkable. We weighed the ordinary explanation that similar minds produce similar stories and found it strong and probably correct. And we weighed the extraordinary explanation that the pattern is a real memory of a real event and found it unproven, but not entirely dissolved, its residue of genuine strangeness lingering after all the honest cautions have been applied. And we end here with the waiting. Because whatever the pattern truly means, whether it is the echo of the human mind or the memory of something real, it left humanity in a particular posture, looking back toward a golden age of teachers who gave us everything and then withdrew, and looking forward so often toward their promised return. In a sense, the deepest legacy of the civilizer is not the gift of the past, but the expectation of the future. The sense planted at the very origin of our civilization and preserved in the sacred memory of peoples across the world, that we are not alone, that we did not make ourselves, that we received our world from beyond, and that the givers said they would come back. Whether anyone is coming, we cannot say. The honest answer is that the promise of return is most likely, like the rest of the pattern, a reflection of the deep human longing for restoration, for the healing of absence, for the return of a lost and greater time. That is the sober reading, and it is probably the true one. But the pattern is real, the recurrence is real, and the strangeness that it leaves behind is real. Across the whole world, humanity remembered the same thing, that someone came and taught us everything and left, and that someone, so many of our oldest traditions insist, promised to return. So look again at the world around you, the city, the written word, the ordered life, the knowledge that fills your days. We inherited all of it from a past so deep we cannot see its beginning. And whether we built it ourselves in the long, slow climb of the ages, or whether it was handed to us by teachers from beyond who then withdrew, the ancient world left us with a question it could not answer, and neither can we. Where did it all really come from, and if it was given, by whom? And are they, somewhere, still watching, still waiting, still bound by an ancient promise to return? What do you think? Were the civilizers only the dreams of the human mind, reaching to explain the mystery of its own origins? Or do you believe that something real stands behind the pattern, a memory of teachers who truly came and truly left? Tell us in the comments. This is a mystery we will never tire of exploring. If this journey changed the way you see the world you inherited and the deep past that gave it to you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more of the stories humanity has never stopped telling.